All right, welcome. Let's talk about the actual application of advanced analytics in healthcare. It is used and applied in such a large variety of areas, it's really hard to explain simply, and it's very hard to give you a comprehensive view or list of all the different ways it's being used. But I'm going to go ahead and go through a ton of examples so you get a lot of variety and just a lot of different ways to look at how advanced analytics is a key tool set in solving problems in healthcare. You're probably going to get bored of me quickly. Feel free to jump ahead or don't watch the whole thing. I want to make sure that there's a lot of content here in case it is interesting or you want some variety, but you don't have to see every last thing in it. Okay, so one of the key categories of problem solving that we do with advanced analytics in healthcare is clinical decision support systems. This is a system that assists healthcare providers by offering evidence-based recommendations for their diagnosis, treatment, care pathway. What is the right next thing to do for the patient? Applications are really wide and varied. We'll look at a lot of them. You can think of diagnosis support in something like an AI image, pointing out where the cancer may be. Medication recommendations or alerts when there's a bad interaction that might be coming, or early detection of disease, trying to predict ahead of time when there may be a concerning something going on for a patient. They tend to classify clinical decision support systems into two different categories, knowledge-based and non-knowledge-based. Knowledge-based is when you take the rules that we know from literature, experience, and evidence, and we go ahead and just make a flat-out rule. Whenever value X is above this threshold, we trigger an action. So it relies on databases of medical knowledge and rules turned into a strict algorithm. So providing recommendations based on patient data, matching a predefined criteria like a drug interaction. If these two drugs are prescribed to a patient, absolutely alert and don't let that happen because we know there's a known negative interaction between these two drugs. That would be the type of thing that's a knowledge-based clinical decision support system. To be quite honest, more often, the more interesting things are non-knowledge-based clinical decision support systems, and it's usually what people really want to hear about. So this is where we're using machine learning and statistical models to identify patterns and predict outcomes that just learn from data and experience in the past, not from explicit rules being spelled out. So an example here would be something like risk prediction of something like census. So it's not saying once blood pressure is at this level and weight is here and all these things come together, then we trigger a risk of census. Instead, it's looking at all prior patients and what we knew about them and did they end up having census or not. That helps us look at future patients to say we know these things about the patient so far. They're at a high risk for sepsis or they aren't. So that's the non-knowledge base, and that's a lot of what people like to kind of talk through as examples. So you can imagine this sort of advanced analytics could be really useful as something like diagnosis support, aids in the interpretation of medical images, as an example, for faster, more accurate diagnosis, assistance in the analysis of patient symptoms, lab results, anything that we have a lot of experience and data about these things were true in a report, or this was the image, here is the result. We can build machine learning models to help do those things. So examples are AI tools for detecting cancer, systems that analyze ECG data to identify cardiac arrhythmias, items like that. Here's just a cool, quick visual of what it actually might look like, what a clinician might be interacting with if they're using one of these AI-driven models for radiology. You see an input image on the left, and then it sort of gets colored by the model as to areas of interest. And it uses tons and tons of examples from the past where a human has already done that kind of work on a radiologic image. And it can take those examples to say, on this new image, here are the areas of interest. So that's sometimes kind of cool for people to see. Another example we talked about was medication management use cases. So provides alerts for potential drug interactions, allergies, doses issues, and then give some sort of recommendation for the appropriate next step to take with that medication, given what we know about the patient, based on what would be safe. So it helps to optimize medication therapies, reduce events of interacting drugs inappropriately. So a pharmacist may end up using a clinical decision support system to be able to continue to monitor all the patients under their care, or all the patients in a hospital, and the many drugs that they might be on, monitoring for safety and known issues that can come up from using different drugs with different patients, or with different drugs together, that sort of thing. Early detection and risk prediction is another type of thing we're trying to do with clinical decision support systems. So you can imagine these models can be helpful in identifying patients that might be at a really high risk of just a specific condition. So it enables a more proactive look at what are the factors contributing to this? Can we intervene anywhere? An example would be predicting sepsis in the ICU. If we're seeing factors that could lead to a high likelihood of sepsis, we have some proactive steps we might take, labs we might take to verify that sort of finding. Identifying patients at risk for heart failure readmission is a way that we may proactively interact with patients more in the outpatient setting, or through monitoring to help support them if we think there's a real high chance that they're going to need intense medical services again. How can we support them to keep them at home as much as is safe, and figure out if they're likely to come back and need our services. Predicting complications of diabetes would be another example of these proactive detection of risk. So that's another thing that these sorts of models can do in healthcare. So there's lots of benefits. I'm sure you can already imagine or hear them from these examples. Improving diagnostic accuracy. We're seeing that happen for real in radiology. Reducing medical errors is a kind of a no-brainer. Why not stop an error if we can detect it? Enhance patient safety, increase efficiency, standardize care wherever possible based on evidence, and try to really enforce the use of evidence-based medicine. And this last bullet, to be honest, shouldn't be there. That's just an error by me, so I'm sorry for that. Challenges and limitations. There are some, for sure. Data quality. Data quality is a major limitation. You must have clean, good data to train on, and expect clean, good data to use when you make a decision. Those things can be measured, and we can sort that problem, but having a big fault in the data quality can make this not really an option for a problem that you're trying to solve. The other issue that can come up is interoperability. So this may be a great system that operates in its own application outside the chart, and so it's going to really limit the effectiveness it can have. Or trying to take that same result and bring it into the chart, they just might not operate together, so they're not interoperable. So where and how solutions are done can sometimes limit how we can integrate them into the existing workflows, which is limitation number 2, and often an issue that we can get a good prediction, but we can't get it in front of the decision maker at the point in time when they really need it. Number 3 is real, and that is alert fatigue. Because there's so many advancements happening in this area, it's easy for the people working on an individual problem to think theirs is the most important and requires a big, blaring alert. However, when there are many people solving problems in that way, it means that the experience for the end user is tons and tons of alerts, and the common reaction that humans have to that is to tune them out and not actually pay attention to them. So that is a big risk of solving this sort of things in a siloed way. Number 4, potential for bias in algorithms just happens based on what we have available in data and history, and not being able to represent everybody we're caring for today with who we cared for from the past, or how we trained our data. And then number 5, it does require continuous updating and maintenance by really smart people. So it's not just a one-time project, it's continuing to look at these things as a product, that you're maintaining and keeping really viable for use in clinical decision support. Okay, future of CDSS is quite bright. You can expect to see the integration of AI and machine learning for even more personalized and predictive care, not just large population-based rules, but actual predictions on the individual patient. Here's what's to expect for this patient given their conditions. The use of LLMs will be a really big part of the probably near to middle term future, as they still need to sort out where and how to surface this information. As many people know, very famously, LLMs can hallucinate and actually can't fully guarantee their accuracy. So the healthcare industry has sort of a skeptical eye towards them. There are techniques coming along to help solve some of those problems, and so we're seeing progress there already, but this will certainly be a part. And I think the key word in the term clinical decision support systems is the support. LLMs will need to be built to really be there for support and not decision making. And that can be hard to do properly, because often these sort of recommendations come across as like a decision's already been made for me by the system. So being able to present that more as a support or just more knowledge is surprisingly a pretty hard challenge. I don't know why it's so tough. You can say it as much as you want, folks can understand it, but it still is just difficult. People have their guards up, honestly, a little bit about that, and you got to help them work through that. You can expect development of more user-friendly and intuitive interfaces. So these things have been built by scrappy young researchers, not always young, I'm not sure why I use that term, but scrappy researchers that are trying to prove a new idea. And so they're doing it in whatever tool they have. They haven't thought that much about the end user yet. Or there's 3 other teams in the institution building something similar in different tools. So there is a huge variety of ways that these things come about, get surfaced, get used. I expect to see a much better user interface and incorporation together of some of these things in the future as we catch up and this becomes commonplace. Expansion of these systems to support remote patient monitoring and telehealth will be a big one. Being able to kind of have an eye on the patient at all times with up-to-date predictive protocols, even when we're not going to send and have a provider be regularly watching every second of every signal. A computer system can. So that's kind of interesting. So I put this at the bottom, that clinical decision support system will become an integral part of healthcare ecosystems, empowering providers to deliver the best possible care into the future. I believe in that vision wholeheartedly, but I'm realistic. I know there are major barriers in the way to making that happen fully, but that's absolutely possible with smart minds and cooperation, and there's so many opportunities to take advantage of this. I've got listed a few more resources here. I'll find a way to make this PowerPoint accessible to you so you can see some of these resources and links. I would just encourage you, this is a large field of study. And if you find it interesting and think it's really kind of neat, there's a lot of ways to stay tuned to the literature on this. And so I've provided a few, a little bit of an overview of the literature landscape. If you're more interested in the future of where it's going, I've got another sort of Google Scholar search you might want to use. And then in sepsis detection use case, I've got a PubMed search that'll get you to that. I like to provide searches so that you realize, oh, I could go find these things for myself, instead of like, oh, here's the one resource he recommends. That's not the case. I think it's very discoverable and easy to find information. So I've got it for you here. All right, let's continue on with examples of advanced analytics. Again, you're probably going to get sick of hearing from me, but I've got so many places that this is used. It's worth just sharing them. You go ahead and tick through whatever you want in this video. I just want a lot of content here for those that want to soak it up. So one place advanced analytics is being used is in personalized medicine. So tailoring treatment to individuals based on what we know about those individuals. Now, what we know could be genomic, like we've sequenced their genetics, and we know from history how a certain drug might interact with this patient, or a treatment protocol that we're considering. Targeted therapies kind of go along with that, and a more full, robust area of that is precision oncology. So this is a place where they've used data and statistics a lot to subdivide their care and pathways into different options that fit patients best, which is really exciting and interesting. So genomics, an example I'll share is something like this: optimizing the warfarin dosing. So warfarin is an anticoagulant that has this what they would call a narrow therapeutic index, which really just means there's a small difference between an effective dose and a toxic dose. So it's got to be really monitored, and the truth is patients respond very differently. So this has been studied a lot, and now that it's been studied, there are things we can point to inform this decision, but they're not simple. They're not easy. It's specific genetic markers make a patient who's more likely to be influenced by warfarin because they're really sensitive to it, or they're able to metabolize it in a certain way. There's also, from history, we know based on clinical data we captured on patients and what their ending reaction was to warfarin, we've got some indicator there, as well as we've collected and have usually social determinants of health and lifestyle factors and environmental things about patients. So in methods, you see that this is being used for like pharmacogenetic or genomic analysis. So like applying machine learning and statistical models to figure out what is the most likely safe dose that will be effective for a patient. What is the optimum that we can give a patient to take care of their what they're dealing with, which is exciting and interesting, and it makes a lot of sense to plug in advanced analytics because the factors at play here are so large and varied, and some of them really kind of undiscoverable or at least unsolvable from a single human computer, right? And so being able to feed them into a system that understands what we know so far about patients and use that to inform how we treat patients into the future is really, really a perfect use case for this. This is where advanced analytics should be being used, when the human computer just can't possibly collect and analyze all the data necessary to make the best decision. Okay, you can imagine this use case. It's pretty straightforward, right? Predicting adverse drug reactions. So the problem that I'll kind of present is with psychotropic drugs. They can cause a lot of side effects, right? And identifying who's at the highest risk of those adverse reactions can really help you figure out the right choice. And so there are some genetic factors that can be collected and measured to figure out whether or not the patient is likely to have one of these adverse reactions. You can imagine we've got a lot of data in the health record we've collected and patients we've treated that we can look for patients with adverse reactions that look like our patient based on patient-reported outcomes. So you can use that genomic data with the other electronic health record information to do something like a machine learning classifier and integrate that data together to categorize the patients into high, low risk, medium risk, to figure out what medication, what's their risk profile, and what would be the best course of action forward on that. Or it could just be used in the background to alert whenever we're hitting a high risk categorization of the patient. It could be used in a number of different ways, but that's the kind of data that would be collected and how it could be used to inform on that. Okay, so let's talk about a different kind of category of these use cases. Targeted therapies is a really exciting and cool one. So this example is in non-small cell lung cancer patients with some specific mutations. I don't understand those mutations. I don't understand the clinical part of it, and that's okay. But the idea is accurately identifying the mutation is critical for treatment selection. What we treat with can really be different if we find one of these mutations or not. So gathering the genomic sequence is a first step, as well as clinical characteristics and taking some images. And here would be some of the methods that would be employed to go ahead and try to help on this problem. First, you can confirm the presence of that mutation by extracting genomic information from the the tumor. Secondly, we can evaluate different tumor characteristics, um, and that can help in looking at past examples of the same characteristics and what were the response rates to targeted therapies that we might be considering. And so that's a beautiful place where taking examples from the past, we can do better at picking the right targeted therapy for a patient. So that's really interesting and neat, as well as they point out this example where real-time tumor monitoring is sometimes used to take images more regularly and use the computer to measure growth rate changes more rapidly than a human can get and read all that data on an ongoing basis, which is a great place to infuse efficiency, better monitoring, all those things by building a system that can do some of this. So that's just exciting, kind of cutting edge territory where those things are happening. HER2 targeted therapies in breast cancer. Another interesting example. So it kind of outlines here in what this problem is that that HER2 protein in breast cancers is associated with really aggressive disease states. But also it means that there might be different therapies that are more appropriate because we know a little bit more. And so determining that status is key for the right choice. So biopsy results would be collected. They have patient record information and follow-up information. So an AI-powered imaging analysis may help to automate pathology assessment of HER2 levels using digital slide scanners. So instead of having to pass the image of the biopsy to a pathologist every time to be read, it can be read more regularly, and this really helps to pull down subjectivity and evaluate against past experiences. And we take a model like this and we can just keep getting it better, keep working on it to increase its accuracy. So this helps us to predict ahead of time. As soon as we get enough examples of people who ended up being HER2 negative, we start to be able to take a step back and say, can we predict that this will be coming? That kind of a thing. So it just keeps going, right? We can keep doing a little bit better, keep knowing a little bit more ahead of time. And then it can inform adaptive treatment algorithms. So based on what we collect and measure about the progression and that HER2 status, that may change the therapies that we deliver. And we can build that all off of evidence of what we've seen work from the past, which is really cool. So more on precision oncology. We've got another breast cancer example. Triple negative breast cancer has no expression of estrogen, progesterone, or HER2 receptors, which limits some of the options for those targeted therapies. So the targeted therapies have often been built around the presence of those things. So that's just the case. We've got sort of this unique breast cancer that doesn't necessarily have a defining feature that we can attack. However, taking a look at this in a different way with advanced analytics, there's still an option, which I think is a neat one that they point out here. So you can grab data like this omics data, which is a genomic transcriptomic RNA sequence. So quickly getting the sequence of the genome of something like a tumor. So getting a biopsy and quickly sequencing it allows you to do something like that first method that's pointed out, an unsupervised machine learning algorithm to go ahead and take the genomic sequences we have of all this same triple negative breast cancer and segment them into what are the different like identifiable subgroups we might have here. Since there's no known pattern we're searching for, we ask the computer to look for patterns ourselves, and so it can help isolate tumors into different subcategories that aren't even yet known, but we can measure and see from the genomic sequence. And so that's kind of interesting because then we can see from the past folks with those same profiles of tumor what was their reaction, what worked well for them. So you see this next method given is a pathway enrichment analysis. So this is to take a look at biological pathways or gene signatures driving each subtype. So we've got the groups subdivided, and now we can apply analytics to figure out more about those groups because the machines just separated them for us, kind of in an unsupervised manner. We can do an analysis to say, oh, look, this grouping that the machine picked out happens to have a specific combination of genes. It happens to have a couple biological, commonalities compared to the other groups. And so that may be a place that we can adjust our therapies to something that attacks that biological pathway, that's more prevalent in this one group of the gene subtypes versus the other. So then you can do the third method, which would be a precision treatment matching. So use that subtype to recommend tailored therapies of how we might address that. So this is stuff that's really happening. People are using incredibly advanced and interesting ways to take data and use it to try to do better at treating diseases. Immune profiling for checkpoints inhibitor therapy. So immunotherapies like this PD-1 and PD-L1 inhibitors look for some cancer patients, work for some cancer patients, but not others. And so we've got some therapies that we see that the general effectiveness has been proven. However, they can really differentiate and see that there is a disparity, that there are patients that respond and patients that don't respond. So you go ahead and you start to gather tumor genomics, immune cell infiltration metrics. So taking a look at the sample itself, they do some interesting things to it and figure out information about the cell and how it reacts to different things in order to pull out even more information and understand this tumor, as well as clinical data about the patient. So that helps in looking for what are common associated biological items that can be attacked in this. So biomarker development, statistical association, and machine learning models linking amino phenotypes to patient outcomes. So tumors of this specific biological type have an increased type of this outcome, and so it sounds extremely complex. I understand. There's a lot of medical terms in here. I understand, but all that's happening is taking a sample of a tumor, measuring as much as we can on it, taking that data to find out what is a common characteristic of that tumor. Because with those common characteristics, there can be past experience from pharmacy data about different mechanisms and compounds that might help attack that group of biomarkers, the what's in that tumor. So it's really interesting, and there's a pretty practical element to it that is buried underneath the really technical sounding terms. So I don't mean to be turning you off with technical terms, but I want to make sure I get a little bit to the practical part of this, that this is just take a sample, get whatever data we can measure about these tumors so that we can profile and find what's common about them and figure out how we might attack it. So really interesting and advanced things that I don't get to work in a ton myself. I get to hear and read about really brilliant people taking on these challenges. If you like those categories, if you think that's really fun and interesting things, especially the use of genomics, there are a ton of resources here. And again, I'll find a way to get this slide deck out to you. Probably put it in the comments of the video. So take a look there, figure out if I've got it there yet. Come back if I don't. You can get to all these and find more information if you like these topics. There's a lot of good resources, or just start searching. You're going to bump into a lot of really amazing, brilliant work that's happening in these areas. So this is an area I am much more familiar with, operational efficiency and cost reduction. So advanced analytics is also used not just on highly clinical things, but to improve the operational side of healthcare, reduce costs, improve workflows, so on and so forth. You can think of things like predicting patient demand, supply chain, fraud detection. So predicting patient demand, you can imagine that our emergency department is a highly fluctuating environment where you've got patients coming in at all sorts of different patterns. However, there is often some pattern to it. Day of the week, hour of the day, after weather events, different holidays, those sorts of things do drive something about ED volumes. And so taking those historical pieces of information, historical ED visit records, and overlaying with seasonal information or weather type information, as well as external factors like local events, you can go ahead and do a number of different models. Methods would be reasonable here, but we list a few like time series analysis or just a typical machine learning predictive model to go ahead and do a forecast of the emergency department. And of course, there's testing when you do this sort of thing to see how accurate am I, what's the type of error I tend to get, so that you can provide a bit of confidence with your prediction. And forecasting this kind of thing can help with how do we staff to these different increases in patients? How will we make sure we have the hospital beds available for the proportion of our visits that end up needing the hospital? So on and so forth. Lots of planning implications to having forecasted emergency department visits. Anything that we do regularly at the hospital can be predicted. So surgical volume projections would be another example. Scheduling to the operating room can be somewhat unpredictable at times. There's different practices that have a lot more predictability. Fortunately, we do schedule it. And so we do have a little more information in this area than we do in something like the ED because we put patients on the schedule. We see how many patients are scheduled to come in. We also can look at history to find out how many more will be added onto that. And so you can imagine we gather the historical surgical schedules, patient characteristics about who is coming in, and maybe even other upstream clinical pathways that would lead to the use of surgical services. And then there's a number of different things that could be done, like a regression analysis, Monte Carlo simulation, optimization algorithms may be done to figure out the right number of resources, where to put people and patients, where to put staff, that kind of a thing. Could be done with this sort of data. You can imagine, very helpful to know how many patients are coming in through a particular pathway, like surgery into the facility. Another area on the operational side would be something like supply chain optimization. So there are a ton of really specialized supplies that have to be distributed on time throughout a large varied area in the hospital, especially something like surgical supplies, getting to an operating room. You can imagine there's a really specific set of tools that need to be in place in time in order to make everything run smoothly. And so you can take the inventory records from the past, the surgical schedules, that are coming up, combine that information to do some demand forecasting for these supply items. Fortunately, this has a little more leeway. You can predict and get extras on hand for safety and some of those things. And even there, you might use an analysis to figure out how much extra should I get in order to be safe, but not waste money. All those things come into play. So tons of places to input predictive modeling and advanced modeling in order to improve something like supply chain into the operating room. Pharmacy supply chain efficiency would be another example I can give. Pharmacy inventory management is even a little more sensitive, right? We can't have pharmaceuticals that have a specific shelf life or a specific condition they need to be stored in coming when we don't have the right setup to handle it. And so taking that historical data and the clinical data of who's coming in can be combined to use to predict what is needed, how much will be needed, and how, is there any potential shortfall coming? We won't have enough of something, some certain type of medication. Lots of great places to plug in predictive analysis into that world. A final one I'll outline is something like fraud detection. So an example would be looking for upcoding This is something that does happen. Upcoding occurs when provider kind of bills up a little bit higher service that may not have happened, or maybe an exaggeration of how complex their diagnosis was. Um, it can lead to, you can imagine, inflated costs, and erroneous claims, all sorts of things. And so we have claims data. We also have the clinical documentation and historical fraud cases that we have the data on. Here's what the claim looked like. Here's what the documentation looked like. It did end up being fraud. By having examples like that, we can comb through new claims data with the clinical documentation to figure out which ones look a lot like those old fraud cases. So this is a place where we can put in automatic monitoring and checking to flag billing that doesn't look right. Something looks off with that. Another type of that sort of billing issue would be phantom billing. So this is actually charging for a service or procedure that never actually occurred. So this can sometimes be even more obvious, like there wasn't a visit on that day. There's no documentation in the record of this thing actually happening. And so having those records, having historical examples, and or any external data that we can collect and infuse could help in building like a flag and anomaly detection type of algorithm to look for things that didn't actually happen, that are trying to get billed, which really does happen. This is true stuff that we have to put in place because folks try to put one over on insurance companies. Another place where there are a lot of use cases would be health monitoring and wearables. The use of devices has grown tremendously, right? To monitor patients in facilities and patients just using stuff outside the facilities, either remote patient monitoring or on their own. So there's a couple of applications that this is being used for, like chronic disease management, of course, telemedicine, you can imagine, as well as like AI-driven diagnostics. Chronic disease management, a good example that touches a lot of people would be something like diabetes, right? So patients with diabetes have a tough time making sure they're in that really tight glucose window to be safe. And so the traditional methods can be lagging and cumbersome and a real pain, but there's all sorts of really new, interesting sensors that are collecting this data and collecting it in an ongoing way. So not only do they have a sensor that will tell them when they're dangerously low, we can also collect and monitor that data for changes that might not hit a threshold yet, but could be heading the wrong direction or could be indicating a problem is coming, which is really interesting and exciting to be able to provide that kind of information proactively to patients. Remote cardiac monitoring for heart failure would be another place where they are taking this and really using this, and I'm well aware of these. So heart failure patients often experience a big issue with retaining fluids and having to get rid of that before they're kind of stable and their vitals level off. So the issue there is if they can't stabilize their fluids, they need to be monitored and be in care. And so frequently that means readmission. They're going to end up back in the hospital. So they send them home with wearable sensors instead of just sending them home and hoping, in order to be able to collect that data and monitor for concerning trends, right? Is something happening that looks like readmission is imminent? Because if there is, we may be able to reach out proactively. We may be able to discuss with the patient what's going well, what isn't, and avoid a costly second visit to the hospital, if at all possible. Telemedicine is something that I'm guessing many folks have already engaged in and used, and you can see the great advantage of being able to just dial in and talk to a provider quickly, especially if you have something like a chronic condition like COPD, hypertension, anything that could really use regular monitoring. Then we can go ahead and get connected through these platforms to do that regular monitoring, have somebody looking at it, and have an algorithm checking it to automate any triggers that may warrant reaching back out, any triggers that should mean we should talk again through the platform. So there's those automatic triage. There's also different things throughout those platforms, like this automated triage system, like tell me your symptoms, what's going on, and we already have your history, so we can put those things together to say you're probably going to be okay, or yes, let's get you into a physical location, let's have a video call, what's best. There's also some interesting new AI video-based tools that can assess things just through the camera on the device, which is really cool and exciting. Um, and all those systems that are doing those little mini monitorings have the advantage of having all of the patient's history kind of integrated and up to date with all of that. So one of those areas where it's really being utilized heavily. Another example might be post-surgical telerehabilitation. If you've ever had a routine minor surgery, you know that the rehabilitation is really what takes the time. Doing your PT and OT, doing your exercises to get back and ready to go is something that can be done from home a lot of times. If you're stable and healthy, we can send you home with wearable motion sensors. You can log in to do remote therapy sessions, remote pain and recovery classification and tracking. So mobile apps make this easier, as easy as it ever has been. And predictive analytics may still be used for identifying patients at risk of a really slow recovery or needing extra support, these kind of things. They even infuse things into those apps to kind of gamify the recovery process, make it a little more fun and interesting. Let's also talk about AI-driven diagnostics. So there's all these really cool advancements that are happening. One example would be arrhythmia detection with ECGs. So arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation can be really difficult to diagnose when using just an initial ECG capture. You come in, we do an ECG, we see something or we don't. But having continuously wearable monitors can really help in gathering more data and having more time and examples to see whether or not an issue is developing. So it allows us to detect earlier warning signs of these issues happening. So they take that wearable ECG and log those events, and they can even infuse clinical data to help inform, that an issue may be coming, or likelihood or measurement of an arrhythmia in a patient, as opposed to just those 5 minutes that you're in the office catching it or not, which is really quite cool. I know we're almost at the end. I just want to give a ton of examples in case this is interesting to folks. I know these are hard to me, but I know. Stick with me. Predicting acute exacerbations for COPD. Flare-ups for folks with COPD can really be scary, and so naturally they want to seek care, like a hospital admission. But finding these things early and helping to intervene can really help save them money, save them time, and worry. And so there are wearable respiratory monitors. Together with, you can collect information on the air quality within an area, like pollen content, air quality indices, weather type of things, in order to see what's the likelihood of these exacerbations potentially coming together into needing the hospital again, so that you can intervene early, give them support, and help keep them from a costly visit that they don't need, which is, again, fantastic place to be putting these sort of proactive monitoring type of systems. We made it to the end. Thanks for sticking with me. This is what I want you to see. This is the only conclusion I need you to have. I don't need you to remember all the terms. I don't need you to remember all the specific examples. I want to impress upon you that advanced analytics is used in a very large number of places in healthcare. Everywhere. It is all over the place, which means tons of opportunity. If you learn these skill sets of how to use data in this way, there are endless applications of it and tons of places to create real value, really help people, which is so exciting. So you see this long list. We went through all these types of examples. Thanks for sticking with me if you made it. But this is what I want you to see, that it is just everywhere. There is so much value that can be created. And I think that should make you excited to try to learn these techniques, learn how to use data in this way because it's a real privilege to be able to potentially do. So thank you for sticking with me.